Well, welcome. Welcome to Closing the Distance, the opportunity we get to speak to the preaching pastor about the week's previous sermon and just kind of get a little bit under the radar, if you like, hear what the pastor has been thinking and some of the thoughts that maybe they weren't able to get out in their sermon. And we've had, what is it, 6, 7 weeks of a summer series. I can't remember how many weeks it's been. The summer's just kind of flown by, but we've been
Yes.
doing, it really has. But Summer Road Trip has been working our way through the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, and we concluded with the very last verses in Matthew with the Great Commission. It was kind of a two-parter. We were jumping the shark last week with Carrie Weatherford, and then we finished that with you this week. And so tell us a bit about your thinking in terms of the Great Commission. Why does it happen where it happens, and why do you think it's so important and relevant to faithful Christians today?
Well, thanks, Dan. Good to see you again, man. Yeah, so I think Matthew, everything that leads up to the Great Commission, when we gotta have to remember when the commission is given to the disciples and to us. Go to the ends of the earth, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I think so the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, all of that stuff needs to be read and remembered to understand what the Great Commission is about, to be peacemakers, to be able to mourn with those who mourn, those kinds of things, to know how to pray the Lord's Prayer. And so it's my hope that, I think we did 9 weeks in Matthew, and obviously there are 28 chapters in Matthew, so we skipped a lot. And I tried to pick out the high points, or just some of the points that I thought were relevant, to give people good taste of what the whole book of Matthew is about, and then they could go and return to it themselves. And so I think the Great Commission answers the how, the why, the when, but maybe the most important question for us is the so what? What difference does it make? And so that was my kind of intention to culminate the series with the Great Commission passage.
It was good. Well, you kind of highlighted or focused on a few words in those verses that are often just kind of glossed over or overlooked. And so in Matthew chapter 28, right there where it's the Great Commission, it says, "When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some of them doubted." And you kind of raise that up as critical even before he sends them out with the Great Commission. You focused on that doubt piece, and why is that so relevant? Again, why do you think Matthew included that doubt when he's finishing his book and potentially trying to encourage people to go and live as Jesus called us to live, and he highlights that idea that some of these people walked away from Jesus even after the resurrection.
Yeah, I mean, I love that part, because I mean, I think it would have been very easy for him to excise that part out and just
Right.
um, not include it, and it would have been more flattering on the early witnesses in church. And I think there's an assumption sometimes, we go, oh, if I would have been there, then I would be full of belief. I would never wrestle with doubt. It's like, no, man, people wrestle with doubt. I mean, doubting Thomas, Judas, after witnessing all these miracles, Peter denies Christ. I mean, there was this wrestling with doubt and faith. And so I really wanted to highlight that it's okay for you to wrestle with doubt and still respond and live the Christian life and live in response to God's grace, even as you wrestle with faith and with doubt. And it's my belief that, like, faith as a concept, not understood as knowledge is in terms of a bunch of facts. 2 + 2 = 4. Well, do I doubt that? Not really. Like, okay, so that's certainty. Well, religious faith is different. It's more trust, right? And that's different. That's more, does my spouse love me? Do my parents love me? Does God love me? I trust in that fact, but sometimes my My spouse gets mad at me. I know that's shocking. Um, my parents let me down at times. Um, but I still trust in their fundamental love. Sometimes I don't understand what God is doing or what God is at work, but that takes trust and faith that can include some doubt. But it's when fear enters in and undermines faith that doubt can become pernicious or toxic. And so, and prevent us from responding to God's goodness and God's grace and us living into the new identity of who we are in Christ. So I think it's really important, especially for preachers, to not to gloss over the doubt part of faith. Because I think it's integral to the concept of what faith is. It's not certainty.
Yeah, good. And that's critical. I think those who are outside the Christian faith, who, atheists or agnostics or whatever, often see faith as ignorance, or I've just decided to ignore or turn my brain off and not process or not think, and that doesn't mean that at all. And
Right.
I think you highlighted that. You made that very clear on Sunday.
Yeah, and I hope so. I mean, because I think this is a very modern question,
Yeah.
because or maybe even a postmodern one. So modernity is looking for certainty, and we go back to
Yes.
Descartes and Kant and Hegel, and them trying to figure out how can we have a foundational knowledge that gives us certainty. Okay, and postmodernity is a response to that and say that project for certainty is not possible. Okay, here's a good example. I have young kids, and my middle daughter, she's about 2.5 now, and she's very inquisitive in an annoyingly sort of way.
Yes, she
So,
is. She's
yeah,
beautiful though.
yeah, well, yeah, that's great, and I love inquisitiveness. But she's like a very young philosopher, right? So she'll say, what would she say the other day? Daddy, um, why are there mushrooms in the front yard? Well, we live in a really humid climate and kind of in like a swampy area of Georgia. And so it doesn't get a lot of sunlight. So these mushrooms sprout up. And she says, well, why? So, well, the way the world works is, mushrooms, you know, and fungi of various sorts grow in humid climates. She says, why? Well, and then she keeps going, why? And I keep giving answers. And finally, I'm just like, that's just the way it is. I don't know. And philosophers call that an infinite regression, where you can continue to say, why. And we don't have what's called a regression stopper. There's no foundational thing that says, oh, it's the world. Oh, that gives me certainty about the way the world works. Okay. So even for non-religious people, I would say religious, we're all religious in some sense, that there is
Yes.
something that eventually we go, that's just the way it is. That's just what I believe. Um, and and so I think to admit that that's the world we live in, that we all are going to have to trust or put our faith in something. It could be that my job will give me meaning, or that's called workism. That's a really kind of contemporary phenomenon, that the meaning to my life I find in my work. And if I don't have my work, my life doesn't have meaning. Or what would be another example? My family. It could be the political party I'm a part of. It could be my nationalism, my ethnicity, my sexuality. Like we go down the line. That eventually, at some point, this gives me meaning and identity. And I think to be honest about that and raise that up, and then say, okay, the problem is, and this is what David Foster Wallace says in his great commencement address. Uh, this is called "This Is Water," and he talks about whatever that is. It's what we worship, and he says we're all worshiping people. The problem is most of us worship things that in the end will kill us or destroy us. If it's beauty, eventually age, and the cultural changes, we may be beautiful at one moment, but it's very hard to hold on to that, for the long term, or our job, or prestige, or power. And so, anyway, that's kind of where I think that wrestling with doubt is important, especially in a postmodern environment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think we also sometimes hang maybe a little bit too much credence on belief. Um, and I need to have we think in a modern way, even though we live in a postmodern world. And so I've got to have everything figured out and understand it all before I'm willing to believe. And that's, like you right now are in the other room. I could choose to believe that or not. That does not change the reality of the situation. Right. And
Right.
so sometimes, when we think about, hear people, I do or I do not believe in God. God's existence does not hinge upon my belief.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of outside of that. And I don't know if you remember in the modern service, I did the children's message, and I tried to talk
Yes, that
about
was
me driving my
fantastic.
car, and if the steering wheel comes off in my lap, that's probably not a good thing. And I don't know all the details of how that thing is connected and how it works, and the steering column and all that kind of stuff. I have faith that the person who constructed it did it well, and I trust. But again, I don't have all those details. I don't have to know all those details in order for me to operate the vehicle safely. And so I was helping them try and understand that difference between
Right.
faith and doubt and trust and what those things were. And so, yeah. We
I
have a
think,
question
yeah, it
here
was a
from
fantastic
oh yeah? Well, thanks.
distillation of what the point I was trying to make, and was very clear. And I think the kids were like, oh, okay, I get that, which
Right.
was really cool.
That's good
And
because I found out like 2 minutes before that I was doing the children's message. So,
sometimes those are the best ones because you have to get real simple, real
that's
quick.
right. That's it. Fortunately, I'd been at the 8:15 service and knew where you were going, so that helped a little bit. I'd have been all sorts of trouble
Yeah,
otherwise.
absolutely.
So here's one of our questions that kind of builds upon that. They're talking about RPC being a part of the PCUSA, which tends to be a little bit more liberal, or that's kind of the wrong word, but you know what I mean in terms of the theology. And then those who come from a more conservative theological bend tend to rely on I guess more modern thinking. So here's the question. It says, uh, it makes me wonder why some more conservative Christian churches seem to teach parishioners that doubt is not to be tolerated, and it shows a lack of faith and disobedience to God. So again, address that. I mean, is doubt a lack of faith? Is doubt disobedience?
I don't think so at all. And I think, um, I think the passage that we studied on Sunday, Matthew 28, I think clearly says Jesus gives the Great Commission to even those who doubt, right? And Peter doubted. I mean, you can go to the book of Acts, and Paul's talking in the Areopagus in Athens, um, and kind of given to a bunch of Gentiles who don't have the context of the Old Testament. How does he kind of get into their cultural understanding of, and he quotes their poets. Okay, so I don't think so. I mean, I'm a little. Here. Okay, let me say it this way. I think people in conservative churches, so-called conservative churches, probably wrestle with doubt just as much as anybody. It's not raised up explicitly, and so most of them keep quiet about their doubts. And like, this is why, like, a lot of young people leave the church, I think, because no one's willing to listen to their doubts, wrestle with it, say it's okay. And so that's a problem. And I think one of the reasons I love being a Presbyterian is our critical, I our critical approach to religion and theology, and thinking through critically about and investigating what we believe and why we believe it. And I don't know about you, Dan, but when I went to seminary, um, I took some big questions, which is the reason I went to seminary. And I spent 3 years. I was like, I'm going to, undergrad, I spent very little time in the library. Seminary, I'm going to spend all my time there. And and I thought, at this point, when I was, my early to mid 20s, I thought I was the only person that had ever asked some of these questions. You know, I was the first person in human history to ask, like, why does a good and all-powerful God let bad things happen to good people? That Did the Bible not drop from the heavens? Like it just
Right.
like no one had ever asked the critical questions about where'd it come from. No one asked like, how do I make sense of the Trinity? How is God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit one, but also three at the same time? Am I the only person to ever ask that? How do I understand God's grace and God's love? But you know, um, like these. How is Jesus both fully God and fully human? That's crazy. No one's ever thought through this. And then I was much relieved in seminary to go, oh, people have been asking these and thinking deeply about these questions for many, many years. In fact, from the very beginning of of the church. And so that was really helpful for me. And I see as part of my vocation to raise those questions that I had and still have and try to offer some of the best answers that I've come up with that I think the church down through history has offered. And not that it's the end of the conversation or that we've figured it all out, but this is the best we've come to now. Now, as a conversation partner, how do we wrestle? How can we move things forward as we have new insights from science and philosophy and culture and experience, that we can do this as a community together, thoughtfully and critically exploring our faith and hopefully living it out in a compelling way that bears witness to God's love and grace revealed in Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, that's powerful. You've told a story before about, going to the basement,
Oh,
library there and been like, oh, clearly people have been thinking about this for a little while because I'm not getting through all these books.
yeah, it's like, but like the foolishness of youth sometimes, you think,
Well, yeah, there's not any of us listening to this podcast right now, Jeff, that cannot see you as an undergraduate student thinking, man, I'm ready to go to seminary and sort these people out. I've got
and
some questions they've never thought of before.
and I just grew up in much of a tradition that you just didn't question. It was like you got the
Right.
Bible, that's all you need, man. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
and I'm deeply appreciative because I have a deep appreciation for the Bible and um I think know it pretty well, but I needed some help in reading it and understanding it in a way that made sense. Reading the Bible in its context for ours. Um, and so I think that was very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's powerful. I think the more I've wrestled with this stuff and again addressed doubt, the stronger my faith has become rather than weaker. And asking these questions doesn't doesn't dismiss them at all. It just kind of says, oh, there are some things that I don't know, I don't understand, but the overarching message remains true and genuine and the same. And so I think we do, as people often fear doubt, and it kind of means, oh, I'm weak or I don't believe, or maybe God is going to dismiss me or get tired of me, or that storm that came last night and the lightning's coming through the ceiling and it's going to knock me out. God is tired of me, and that's just not the case at all. And I think that the fact that you highlighted that one tiny little phrase before the Great Commission, I think Matthew does that intentionally as well. I don't think Matthew, when putting this together, understood that it's going to be generations after the ascension, and we're still going to be here not seeing Jesus. Like, they early on, the early church thought it was imminent that Jesus was coming back within a generation. And so there are questions for them about why are people of the faith dying, because we
Right.
thought Jesus was coming back. So very, but I think the fact that he puts that in there gives some space for those who have never seen Jesus to still accept faith. He's saying, if you were there and saw this with your own eyes, that is not a guarantee that you have accepted all this, because there were people that did and people that didn't, and they observed it all.
Yeah.
And and what do you think that is, though? I mean, what do you think separates those who are willing to kind of embrace faith in Jesus, faith in God, and those who just it's just too big a stretch, too big a leap, and they just kind of more than just doubt, they just choose to walk away. What do you think the difference is?
Well, I think there are a lot of differences. So I think, sometimes people have had bad experiences of religion. A church wounded me, a pastor didn't, harmed me in some way. So people have bad experiences, and so they kind of, I would say, I hate this image, but throw the baby out with the bathwater. Um, you know, they throw it all out and reject it all because of one instance. Okay. And I understand that. And I'm very deeply sensitive to that. I think some people they have legitimate questions that no one's ever really responded to or helped them work through. Um, I had one of my favorite seminary professors. Well, he wasn't at the seminary, he was at the university, and he made a deep impact on my life. And he grew up in a Presbyterian church, but during college and grad school, he became an atheist. And so but he loved Christian theology still. And we'd sometimes ask him, well, why are you an atheist? And he would say, in your language, I have been given the gift of grace. And he saw it really as grace as a miracle that we can take no credit for our faith, but it's a gift that God gives to us. And I think it's kind of sad, but also I
Interesting.
found that there is a mystery to it that I just don't understand. And I think yeah, so that's kind of where I've kind of come to. But I also think, like, you know, going back to what you were saying a little earlier, that God wants to be in a relationship, not just of faith, but of love with us. Love the
Yes.
Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? Jesus says this, drawing on the Old Testament. But loving the Lord your God with all your mind, I think, is really helpful. That what is a loving exploration of God with our minds is still a part of love. And with my wife, we've been together, 14, 15 years. And have I come to the end of knowing her? Well, if I think I have, then I've misunderstood the nature of love. And you've
Yes.
been married a lot longer than I have. And I know you guys have a really tight relationship that still continues to change and morph and grow.
Yeah.
And
I'm still
that's
learning things about her.
right, and that's the nature of love. And if that's true for two finite creatures, then how much grander must it be for a
Yeah.
finite creature with infinite God? And I think to understand intellectual inquiry, asking questions, wondering, hypothesizing, um, if we understand that as a type of love, I think that really helps reframe what it needs to be. So it's not I got to figure this person out. And
Right.
once I figure them out, I can move on. No, the point is we're in a lifelong committed relationship where we're going to explore new ideas. We're going to do new things. And hopefully that will deepen our relationship, but not in the sense of, oh, we figured it all out and got to certainty. Now we don't really need to talk anymore.
Right. Yeah, and I think that is sometimes the thought or the pursuit of those in their Christian faith, but
Yes.
it's again, you illustrated that well. If we think of that in relationship to one another, yes, over time, Courtney far better now than you did 15 years ago. Likewise with me, but it never stops. We continue because we're both growing and evolving. And in this case, if we are finite, God infinite, there's no possible way for us to fully grasp all that God is and all that God does. And so that's part of the beauty of that relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think and we cannot forget that when we think about faith and doubt and intellectual kind of exploration, that's still a part of love.
Mm.
It's not something separate from the affections and the way I feel. And it's not just happening in between our ears.
Yeah. Yep. And
So
I think that's why both you and I have kind of chosen to be in this denomination. For one, I think that kind of is a big tent and offers room for kind of struggling with some of those questions and doubts. We all do. We look around the world and go, things aren't right.
right.
And that's the question that St. Francis, asked, if God is all powerful and God is all good, why is there evil in the world? That's a deep question. And that's often a question that just people say there can't be a God because God would not allow, all this hurt and harm and all that kind of stuff. But that's not necessarily the case. It doesn't automatically dismiss, a benevolent God. And so
Yeah.
I think we're afforded that, and I think it's great that again we address these things in sermons and discussions and Bible studies. You dropped me in a Bible study yesterday that dealt with very similar questions, and
Yeah.
I very much don't appreciate it, but it was good for me to and again coming out of the book of Matthew, so right through all the Gospels. I think you're right, and maybe we finish here, uh, in that it would have been very easy for the authors of the Gospel to pull out all the questions and doubts and negativity and just gloss over everything and make Jesus look like this, everything about the life of Jesus was just perfection. And there weren't any questions and there weren't doubts and there weren't struggles, there weren't issues, there weren't times when he grieved, all those kind of things. And yet that's not the case at all. That the people around him and Jesus himself are demonstrated as real humans with real emotions and doubts and questions and struggles, and that makes it real. And our Bible is full of that right through.
Yeah. I
I think
totally
that,
agree. It
yeah,
wasn't hagiography. It wasn't,
right,
just a glowing representation of a life where everybody agreed and it was just kind of
right,
a
right.
utopia on Earth. It was very earthy.
Yeah. I knew you'd have a big word for that. You're much better at that than me. Hagiography, that's the word.
Yeah, that's like you tell like the life of like famous people. I can't come up with a good one.
Well, MLK is a good one where, the
Uh,
further away we get from him, the
um,
more he's kind of,
you get some of this Life of the Saints, but you get it like wrote a book on I think who's still at Penn, I think. But anyway, African American scholar. He wrote a book that talks about a lot of kings uh, stuff that didn't want to you wouldn't put in the highlight, but he said so that people see him as a real person with flaws and troubles and not as somebody floating like an angel above the earth, which I think is um, I think true for all of us, that we're fallen creatures, we're cracked vessels that God has come to redeem.
yeah. I think that's a good place to end. I do want to highlight that this coming week, for those who are coming to church on Sunday, that it's kind of a one-off. And um, I've talked to Jeff a little bit about this. He mentioned a little bit on Sunday, but he may have dug himself a little bit of a hole, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he gets out of it. So, we know that there are two creation stories, and I guess when you kind of put that in there, you had some ideas, and hopefully you're developing those ideas now about how do we address this. And again, that's more doubt and questions, because they seem to be two different stories, and yet they're both included in our scriptures. Why is that? What is the point of that? And does that mean either the creation stories are incorrect or wrong, or what do they teach us and tell us about the creation that God performed, and how is that relevant to us today? So I look forward to that as well.
It's going to be fun. I look
Really look
forward
forward to that.
to in fact, the rest of the day. That's basically what I'll be wrestling with today.
I figured.
I've set a high bar. I'm not sure I'll be able to get over it.
Well, we hopefully everyone listening to this will get there and just kind of sit there with bated breath and then be ready. Are we allowed to ask questions for next week after this sermon, or are
You
we
can
done with the
always
personal questions?
submit questions. So
Okay, so yeah, so everyone listening, get ready. Have your pens and paper ready on Sunday to take down some pretty tough questions to send to Terry, so we can ask Jeff next week.
that'll be
Jeff, it's
fun.
it's
Oh,
been a pleasure. I've enjoyed this sermon series and working through the Gospel of Matthew. Thank you for your candidness and your open and honesty about your own struggles and your own doubts, and yet how that has actually helps develop your faith and all of our faith. So I
Well,
appreciate
thanks,
that.
Dan. I appreciate it. I'll remind folks, we have 8:15, 9:30, 10:45, and we're back to an 11 o'clock service.
Back
So
to
that's
11. There's a lot of people
the
excited
whole
about
morning
that.
with us.
Yeah. Great. Thank you very much,
All right.
everyone, for
Thanks, Dan.
listening.
I'll see you soon.
All
Take
right.
care, man.
All right.